I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel discussion this evening, new power grid issues in the Hudson Valley. This discussion is being sponsored by Citizens for Local Power, the towns of Rochester, Rosendale, Marbletown, and the Marbletown Environmental Conservation Commission. I'd just like to do a couple of housekeeping items before we start. You'll notice there's some signs here. Please turn off your cell phones. So please do that. Also, we have two exits from the building in case of an emergency. One is located right there, which is how you all came in, and there's another exit over here. So just that we have that covered. My name is Carl Chipman. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the supervisor of the town of Rochester. I'm also the president of the Ulster County Association of Town Supervisors and Village Mayors. Contrary to the rumor that's running around here, Rochester did not annex Marbletown. So Mike, you can have a sigh of relief. Some people wonder, what the heck am I doing here? Well, I've been involved in many issues concerning power. One of them, many of you know, is fracking. I've been a leading opponent against fracking, and I'm steering member of elected officials to protect New York. I first met Jen Metzger when Fortis was attempting to, well, they took over Central Hudson and bought them out. We first met then. Since then, we've been working together. I've been working with, fortunate enough to be working with Citizens for Local Power. And we've been meeting and working on issues concerning power. And I'll be quite honest with you, Central Hudson members might not like this, but I have a vision someday of local power, local sustainable power, controlled by us. I'll just let you know a little bit of what we're doing tonight. The forum is actually broken into two separate discussions. One is the new capacity zone. We'll have a couple of presentations on that. And then the floor will be open for questions and answers and discussions. We're going to allow about 30 minutes for that. I ask that you raise your hands to be recognized and you come to the mic. Actually, you can wait in line for the mic if you like. I'm going to give preference to Ulster County residents here because we haven't had an opportunity to really learn or speak about these things. I know those of you that are here from Dutchess County, it's been a very hotbed issue. So please give your neighbors across the river a chance to discuss and ask. The second part is going to be on proposed transmission upgrades. We'll have a few presenters there, and then we'll have another 30-minute question and answers. We're trying to keep this so we get done about 9 p.m. So I ask that you please be respectful of your neighbors. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce someone very special who is a real firebrand here. And her name's Jen Metzger. She's the newly elected member of the board, the town board for the town of Rosendale. She's also one of the founding members of Citizens for Local Power, and Jen does about a half dozen other things. So please give Jen a welcome.
Thank you, Carl. I don't know if I'll live up to that. Oh, my two, how's this on? I don't want to stand in front of Tom. Okay, so as Carl mentioned, we are here tonight to talk about two power grid issues affecting us here in the Hudson Valley. The new capacity zone and plans to upgrade, I think it's about a 150-mile span of transmission lines. Do I have that right? I'm just curious, how many people here have heard about the new capacity zone or know what it is? See, that's exactly what I thought. You know, it's not really in the public consciousness, but surprise, it's supposed to go into effect May 1st, and it is going to impact our area. And we'll be hearing about it in greater detail tonight. But we've organized this forum to fill this information gap, and we have this really great chance tonight to ask questions of the people whose organizations and companies are directly involved in these two issues. And we have a really superb panel, and I want to thank you all for making the trek out to our area to meet with us tonight. Some have traveled from way upstate. as far as Albany and beyond. I also want to really thank the towns of Marbletown, Rochester, and Rosendale for co-sponsoring this forum. It really shows, our town's proactive engagement in these issues. And a special thank you to Supervisor Carl Chipman and Judith Karpova and the members of the Marbletown ECC and Rochester Defense Against Fracking who helped set this forum up tonight, to Carl Weldon Productions for providing audio, and to Michael Camargo who's videotaping this for all those people who cannot attend tonight. I am a member of the Rosendale Town Board, as Carl mentioned, but I'm here tonight on behalf of Citizens for Local Power, which is committed to helping our communities reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, realize our full potential for renewable energy use, and really help build resilient communities, resilient to the impacts of climate change, like power outages from major storms and heat events. And if we were where we need to be right now in New York State, if we had a more decentralized energy system that relied more on renewable energy sources, and if we really got really serious about demand reduction, and there are so many opportunities to reduce demand, then we wouldn't be sitting here tonight, because the problem that these plans are meant to address wouldn't exist. We would be demanding less power, sourcing more of it locally, and at less cost to us. But we're not there yet, and we continue to be reliant on a centralized power grid that transmits electricity from mainly from large-scale power plants outside of our area. There are some problems with our infrastructure. A major problem we're going to be hearing about tonight is that there's very high demand downstate, and I'm interested to learn how big that area encompasses. But New York City and Long Island and Westchester together account for over half of the electricity demand in the state, and there's not enough local supply to meet that really high demand. So there are two approaches, two plans that have been offered by different bodies to address this problem. The transmission upgrade proposal has been advocated by the governor in the Energy Highway Initiative and the blueprint that came after that. And the new capacity zone was first proposed, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was by NYISO, is that correct? Or was it first? Well, he'll explain that. But it was just approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we'll get a much better understanding of that process from Tom in just a minute. The transmission upgrade proposals, four proposals have been submitted to the Public Service Commission from private companies. Three of these affect transmission lines in Dutchess County. One of them affect transmission lines in Ulster County. They've had a couple of informational meetings in Dutchess. There was a lot of public concern, I understand, about the potential impacts on sensitive lands and ecosystems, private property, view sheds, and other issues. The proposal affecting the Ulster side, my understanding is that it is within the utility corridor, but we will hear more about it tonight. The new capacity zone is also aimed at addressing the supply constraints, but in a different way. It's looking to encourage investment in generation closer to where this high demand is. And this issue is going to be first on our agenda, but I just wanted to start out with a couple of questions that I think are very important to us. Both of these issues are going to affect our area. Both may involve billions of dollars of investment in the current centralized system of distribution and large-scale power generation. And it's important for us to understand what the costs and benefits of each of these plans are to us here in Ulster County. And also, we also really need to understand, whether either or both of these plans are necessary. And also, I think it's really important for us, really vital for us to understand how these plans square with our longer-term goal of transitioning to a decentralized system, more decentralized system, energy system that is more resilient, more sustainable, and does not depend upon fossil fuels. We're going to kick it off with the new capacity zones. Our next speaker, Thomas Rumsey, he is Vice President for Marketing and Communications at NYISO, New York Independent Systems Operator, which has the incredible responsibility of managing the power grid, as well as administering the wholesale energy market. And I have seen Tom speak at 2 different energy conferences in the last 4 months. And he excels at explaining really complex issues in forms that do not
Hope my A game showed up today. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Before Tom begins and he sets up, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize and thank some of our local elected leaders that are here tonight. I see Manajo Green, our newly elected legislator from Rosendale. Mike Warren, our Marbletown supervisor. No, I'm not taking over good stuff. Doug Adams, right next to Mike. He's a town council member in the town of Marbletown. And we're also honored to have Ken Hansen from Woodstock here. He's on the town board, town of Woodstock. Also, we have a very dedicated public servant here, Dennis Doyle, our Director of Planning for Ulster County. Thank you for coming.
So no pressure. Apparently I'm really good at this. Thank you very much for that, Jen. So I saw about 5 hands on the new capacity zone. Who's ever heard of the New York Independent System Operator? Wow. When Manajo and I first met like 2 years ago, probably, maybe 3, there might have been 3 names. So I want to start by explaining who we are and what we do, because I think that was roughly 20% of the crowd that said they knew who we were. We were initially called the New York Power Pool, and that was formed in the late 60s and took control of the grid in 1969-1970 timeframe based on the 1965 blackout. We have 4 key missions. We run the grid, we administer the open competitive markets, we do the planning for the state, and we try to advance new technologies like the renewables and the storage that we were talking about. We're a nonprofit organization, we don't make any money on the grid, and we're not a government agency. So we don't work for the governor, we work with the PSC and the market participants, which is everybody in the energy space and the consumer group. Our primary mission is the reliable operation of the grid. We have a control center, we have 2 of them actually. They're massive 2-story representations of the grid, and we don't own the assets, but prior to the 1970 transition to the power pool, the New York grid was basically pieces of geography where the utilities owned the generation, the transmission, and the distribution system. I'm going to use an analogy throughout the evening just because when I came into this space, it's what helped me make sense of it. If you think of the road systems, the transmission lines are the interstate highways, okay? And that implies a number of things. 1, they're the big ones that everybody travels on. But 2, there's a lot of interstate commerce and laws that apply to those that may not apply to your local roads. And that gets into the markets that we'll cover in a minute and why FERC has a role at all. And second is the distribution lines, which are owned by, well, they're all owned by the utilities, but they're managed by the utilities and their control centers. That's what comes to your house. So the power flows down the big transmission lines and it gets into the distribution lines that come to your house. So when you've lost, we say we haven't had a blackout since we've been running. They're like, well, I lost power last week. Well, so did I actually. But That's on the distribution system, it's not on the transmission system. And there's a lot of differences. Obviously, when you get down to the small lines and you get down to the wooden poles going through, there's a lot more opportunity for those kind of interruptions. But the reliable operation of the grid is our number one focus. It's why we believe the new capacity zone is important, and we'll get into that. We also administer the open and competitive wholesale energy market. Under Bill Clinton, this idea of the monopolistic, vertically integrated utility, where they own the generation, the transmission, and the distribution, he said, we don't want that anymore. It's not in the best interest of the consumers. We want open access to these wires. Predominantly driven in some aspects by the advent of wind power. Because if a utility didn't want to put wind on the grid, no one put wind on the grid because you could put it up, but you didn't have access to the transmission lines. So he deregulated that market. And what deregulation means isn't it was a free market and everybody just went nuts. It meant that generation no longer gets a regulated rate of return. In other words, when you wanted a power station back in the old days, Central Hudson, Con Ed would say, we have a need based on growth and our ability to meet that growth. We need a new power station. They'd put it in their rate case and they'd get a percentage rate of return, a regulated rate of return. Now the returns that the generators make is based on their competition and their ability to compete in the market. And so we administer that market. When we were formed under, Bill Clinton did it nationally, it was under Pataki in the state, and they formed, the power pool turned into the New York ISO, and they made us a nonprofit so that we wouldn't be driven by a bottom line to make those markets work in a specific way, other than an efficient market system. We do the planning for the state. We look as far as 10 years out, and we buy zone, and I'll go through it shortly. What's the load growth, demographics, weather patterns, all those things, and we say this is what you need by location in the state of New York, 10 years out. And then we say this is what we got, and if there's a gap, we do what we call a call for market solutions. In other words, if there's 500 megawatts needed in this area, we go out and say, we need this. And developers can come in and propose different projects, all the way from demand response through power stations, really, we're agnostic to the technology. We just want to make sure that the lights go on when we flip the light switch. And at the same time, the utilities work through a regulated solution in case the market doesn't produce the results, doesn't produce an answer, so that we can maintain reliability. The last one is advancing technology infrastructure. You know, there's a number of examples. It's not really what we're here to, but I just want to hit a couple. You know, when wind became a bigger product and a larger player on the system, it has some inherent challenges. It doesn't, the wind, as we all know, the wind doesn't blow all the time, but it has some great advantages where it's a free fuel source once it's built. And so how do they compete and how do they bid in? If you want a wind turbine, how do you commit to producing power tomorrow if you don't know the wind's going to blow? And so we develop market rules to allow these technologies to come in and compete without penalizing them for the variability of their sources. And so we try to evolve the markets to accommodate new technologies. We've done it with solar, we've done it with solar, we've done it with wind, and we've recently just finished a DOE smart grid project that put a lot of, it's like we can see the grid now like an ongoing EKG. We can see the exact voltage levels in a way that we couldn't do. I know that sounds pretty boring, but it does help us. You know, when those big forest fires this summer in Canada, we could start to see some of the disruptions on the system so that if it ever became too large, we could disconnect from them and it wouldn't affect New York. The last big blackout we had started in Ohio. Literally a tree knocked a wire down. And if we'd have been able to see that disruption, which started an hour and a half before it hit our system, by the time it hit us, we had 3 seconds to respond, and we didn't. And so you lost a lot of power in New York. So now we have the technologies, the smart grid systems out there to prevent that kind of thing. So those are our 4 key missions. That's what we do. I think when we were formed, the reason they decided to make us a non-government agency was they didn't want, you know, everybody loves politicians, but they're not around for 40 years like a lot of these assets. And they're very expensive investments, and I think the idea was, you know, if somebody comes in very pro-nuke, you don't want to dump a ton of money into nuclear, and the next guy hates it and you try to shut them down. You just end up all over the map, and it would have been a disaster. So that was one reason. The nonprofit status is obvious. You know, there's a lot of money in these markets. we don't need to be driven by a profit margin. We need to be driven by, just keep the lines on. So here's what the grid looks like in New York State. And I know this is hard to read out there, but it's going to get into why you've asked me to come speak, which is the new capacity zone. The red line that you see there, the red lines are the transmission lines. You asked a question earlier, how much is down here? 64% of the load is what we call in the southeast New York, which is that shaded area down into Long Island and New York City. 50% of the generation is down there. So there's a disparate amount of need and supply. And that's been long-standing. In the last 15 years since competitive markets, 80% of the investment in new generation has been in those zones, close to the load. Now, you would say, well, no kidding. Why would you put it in Watertown if you need it in New York City? Well, our friendly neighbors to the east of us, in New England, they have a number of states under their ISO structure. And most of the generation was built in Maine because it was cheaper to build, it was easier to permit. All the demands in Boston. So they built all the generation, and then they had to build all the transmission to deliver. And that's double. You don't want to pay twice. You don't want to pay once, but you definitely don't want to pay twice. So we don't have that. We have what we call locational pricing. That's important for tonight's discussion because the capacity zones, by and large, set that pricing. And a capacity zone quite simply reflects where do you have more need than transmission can get you generation, okay? Because if you think of it as an hourglass, if we were one big bowl of sand, we'd all have the same price. That's what a day looks like when there's no constraints. This is all on our website. Everything we do is, the knock was, we don't know what's going on. It's very complicated stuff, but it's all transparent. On our website, on our homepage, you can see what the prices of power are by the minute. We don't shade it or hide it. In a day where there's no congestion, everybody has, by and large, the same price of energy because we can move power around. The lowest cost power gets selected and gets delivered. On a day where there's congestion and those interstates log up just like you do on rush hour traffic, you start seeing different prices of energy because you're starting to see a disparate demand and supply, okay? And so less efficient generation is being dispatched because we can't get the lower cost stuff delivered, okay? It's really supply and demand at its most basic. So the colors there you'll see, and I don't know if you can see the laser, but down here typically are the highest prices. Long Island, obviously on an island, has a hard time importing power. Even with all their transmission lines that they've put in, most of their generation comes on island. So when you have a peak demand period, they start a lot of their older generation, which is expensive stuff, and so their prices go up. When it's not congested, we can deliver them power from as far away as Hydro-Quebec. So what you see in this chart is really a reflection of the constraints in the transmission system. Over here you've got Niagara, large power producer, and relatively low demand. They don't typically see high prices out there. In the central part, between Utica and Albany, there's a constraint. We'll go back one chart. Between Utica and Albany, these are and then Albany down into the city, this is called Leeds Pleasant Valley, because that's we're very creative in our naming. That's where the majority of the congestion is. It's very, I used to live in DC for a while, you knew which roads to avoid. On peak days, now this isn't every day, but this is on peak days, you just simply can't move any more power through those lines. And so that results in what we would consider inefficient dispatching of older generation, more expensive generation. And the dynamic of New York is you have Niagara, you have the Oswego complex with the nuclear plants that are relatively low cost. You have all the wind up in this area. It gets bottled on a peak day. We can't deliver it down to the city and down in the lower Hudson. So, the new capacity zone, they're currently today, well actually, yeah, today there are 3 capacity zones. Long Island is one, New York City is one, and then we have what we call rest of state, which is rest of state. We're a room full of engineers. If we'd have called it anything else, it would have been years to figure it out. So that's modeled on, if you go into the city, a lot of the transmission goes underground, and that's an incredibly congested point. The Con Ed struggles in getting, it's why some of the new projects are taking generation right into the city, right to that point, because once it goes underground, it gets bottled. It's simply, again, if you think of it as an hourglass, you have the generation and then you get to a choke point and then you get to a smaller bubble. You have two options. You add more generation at the bottom of the hourglass or you make the constraint bigger. Those are the only two ways to solve that. And more generation can be less demand. You know, if you want energy efficiency, it can be any. We just model what the requirements are. We don't dictate, what you have to build. The challenge with, and just on an aside, because energy efficiency, New York has had, I think I'll try to head off a question, what about all the energy efficiency we've been doing in New York State? It's been very successful in reducing the energy usage day to day. Where we've not seen the impact is on peak days. And we are required to have enough power for the peak demand plus roughly 18%. And what energy efficiency has done is made us all very efficient in our day-to-day usage. But when it's a really hot day, everybody kicks on air conditioners. We've set peak demand records in New York State, summer and winter, in the last 7 months. So we've never needed more power in New York State in our history than we have this last summer, and then I think last week or a week and a half ago. So we haven't seen the impact, nor has anybody, by the way. It's a national. We're working at why that is and trying to figure it out. But that's the reality. And so that's our job, is to plan to the peak plus a reserve so that when the peak hits, we can make sure that the lights down. So, new capacity zone. I'm not going to read this to you, but this is where did it come from. Back in 2007, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is this DC entity that runs wholesale energy markets for the country, told us that we need to take a look at this constraint and determine whether or not there's what we call a deliverability issue between this area and the blue area. In other words, is there a growing demand that you can meet with your transmission? And so we went and studied that. We studied with our market participants, and I know this is tough to condense in 10 minutes, but it's quite a process. It's nothing we do in isolation. And what we found was there is a constraint there. We simply can't. We've lost 1,700 megawatts in this area in the last 3 years. This last summer during the heat wave, we had to call what we call demand response 5 days in a row. And that means large electricity users reduce their usage. Simplistically, if you're a manufacturer, you shut down one line of your manufacturing. You get paid to do that, but it's still, imagine what that does to your supply chain and your operations and your employment and all those things. The next step after calling demand response is we have to start taking people's power. And that's nothing we've ever had to do, but that's how close it's starting to get down here on these peak days, especially when it goes 5 days in a row. Fortunately, every generator we had down here was available. It was running. If one had tripped off, we'd have had a really difficult week. But they all stayed running, knock on wood. Very similar to these last couple of weeks in the wintertime. We have seen incredible generation availability because of, during peak demand, that's when they need to be running. So, we kind of dragged our feet on it. They told us in 2007 to do it. We were like, we took our time. And then they said 11. And in 2011, they said, go do it. Since you guys are going to do it on your own, we're going to tell you to go do it. So we did it. And so we went through the process of what would it look like, what would it entail, where would it be, and it's this blue area, the lower Hudson, central Hudson area, Orange and Rockland, some Con Ed areas. But it's really driven by, it's a number, there's 1,600 megawatt gap that we can't deliver through there. So the only answer, there's two options. You either change how much you need here by adding or subtracting the demand, adding generation or subtracting demand, or you increase the throughput, which is some of the transmission lines that they're going to talk to you later, where I can talk to you. So those are really the two options. And so what the new capacity zone is designed to do is send a market signal that says if you're going to build, if you're a generator coming in or you're a developer and you want to build in New York State because prices are good, this is a good place to do business, you're buying all this stuff. We're telling you, build here, don't build there. Because if you build up north of that constraint, it doesn't help anybody. And believe it or not, we've had that happen. And because we can't direct people to build. We don't have that. We don't cite. And people can do what they want. But this is where it's needed, and that's, in that sense, a price signal, right? They're going to respond to that price signal. So what is that price signal? My friends at Central Hudson have made my last couple of weeks very helpful with that mailer that they sent to everybody, that it was going to be $1 billion. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate that. There was a lot of concern that when you put these filings in, you say, here's how we want it constructed, based on certain assumptions, and there were a lot of people that wanted, if you're a generator, you want these assumptions, so prices will be way up here, because you make more money. And if you're a consumer advocate, you want it way down here because you don't want it to cost any money. And somewhere in the middle is probably the right answer. In these bar charts, they're impossible to read, but I'll just show you what the directional means. This is what the worst case scenario would have been if our filing that we put into FERC, if they had rejected all of our requests of technologies and return on equity assumptions and all those things. Where it turned out is where we believe the impact will be. This is what it was last year, by and large. And what it was, when I'm saying it, what it is defined as the cost to procure the capacity that you need for this area. It was around $185 million this last year. With our filing, the worst case scenario would have been this. That's what you've seen in not Central Hudson's press releases, but some others, where it was going to be $350 million, $450 million a year. That was what those press releases were referring to. What we filed is going to put us in this area in about the 240 range, so a delta of about 50. We haven't finished the numbers yet, but it's important to know that's the capacity price. So put it in a way, your bill has 3 sections, and I think John's going to cover this a little in more detail. But my bill, your bill has three sections to it. The utility charge or deliverability charges, the wholesale energy cost, or the commodity cost, and then the taxes, assessment, and fees. Each are about 1/3. So your wholesale cost is about 1/3 of your bill. This represents 20% of that third. So when you see this increase from here to here, it can be frightening, but when you think of it as 20% of 1/3 of your bill, we're working with the PSC to figure out what that is going to be on a retail bill. But it's, we don't anticipate it being as dramatic as some people, I think, were afraid of. I don't know if you guys have done the math, but I think the worst case was 10% if the worst number would have happened. So where we're at now, I think it's probably around maybe 2. So next couple things, what happens next? There's a lot of plants that have mothballed. Danskammer is one. You've got Bowline, you've got Astoria. A lot of those may look at this and come back. That would have a significant impact on the overall cost. New resources coming in as early as 2016. And then these Asia Highway, which by 2018, if that happens, that's another 1,000 megawatts as well. So in the short term, it's either going to be more stuff coming in as resources or the ability to move more resources down. How'd I do?
Very
Great.
Well, that's tough to cover that when you're going quick. I'm like,
But I can tell you this, that you improve every time out, and you explain it as I've never seen anybody else explain it.
oh, well, thank you.
Next up, we have John Maserjian. He's the Media Relations Director for Central Hudson. He coordinates communication with the local news, media, and community organizations. He's going to discuss his company's perspective on the new capacity zone. I was fortunate to have worked with John during Haering, and if it wasn't for John, many of you wouldn't have had dry ice and water, and to this day, I thank you for that. Before I let you start, John, I was remiss when I was introducing elected officials. My friend and co-conspirator at times, Sue Zimmett, the supervisor of New Paltz, is here, and she's also a former Ulster County legislator. So please go ahead, John.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is John Maserjian. I'm with Central Hudson. And Tom, thank you for that great summation of what the capacity zone issue is about. And it is something that's going to be imposed on our area by federal regulatory authorities. It does change the way utilities and energy service companies, which means companies that you can provide power from aside from your utility, must now purchase capacity or energy for our region. Initially, as Tom alluded to, we were very concerned because it had the ability to raise electric prices in our region, which includes Hudson Valley down to New York City region, by $400 million, and for our area by nearly $100 million. So we needed to take action to try to mitigate or reduce the impacts that this new capacity zone might have. The result, if they were at those levels, would be about a 10% increase in residential bills and as high as 18% for our large industrial customers. That's a big impact. So we really are taking this issue very, very seriously. So we're working to reduce or eliminate the impacts of this capacity zone. So we've joined with the utilities, with the New York Public Service Commission, with the New York Independent System Operator to find ways that we can mitigate the effects of this capacity zone. But as Tom also said, electric bills are divided into two parts. It's delivery charges, which is the charge you pay the utility company to maintain and operate the electric system. And then there's the supply charge, which is the electricity itself. And supply is made up of two components: the electricity that flows through the wires, and something called capacity. And that's what we're talking about tonight. So capacity is really, we're paying generators to be available to meet peak demands or to come online quickly if we need them to. For example, if another generator should go offline for an unexpected reason. And capacity is required. We must buy capacity. Any energy supplier, any utility or any independent energy supplier must purchase capacity. That's part of what we're required to do. Now, as you saw, the New York grid is separated into various zones based on the location of the generators and transmission lines, as Tom had noted. Currently, Central Hudson is part of the rest of New York State, so we're able to buy capacity from, right now, today, from anywhere in New York State. When this capacity zone is formed, we're going to be required to buy capacity only within this new zone. And this new zone is going to include Central Hudson service area, most of Orange Rockland's service area, part of New York State Electric and Gas, and Con Edison's service area. So we're going to become in a smaller zone than we're in now. And we're going to have to purchase, right now it's up to 88% of our capacity only within this zone. And what that's going to do is drive up the market price for capacity, and that's where these higher prices are coming from. And why is this happening? As Tom said, it's because of the bottlenecks that currently exist in the transmission system. It constrains supply, not just to New York City, but to here, within the Hudson Valley area. And the federal regulations mandate that New York or any area identify these areas that are affected by constraints and form these capacity zones in order to raise the price of electricity. And the reason for that is a strategy to attract generators to build in this region, as Tom had said. So we don't want to see generation necessarily built someplace else. We want to see it built here. If the price of electricity is higher here, that may entice generators to come and build here. Our opinion is that it's just going to enrich the current generators at the expense of our customers. We don't think this is the right thing. So now we feel a better solution, which is the other part of the coin, is the transmission solution. Because the transmission solution will relieve the bottlenecks and will do so and can do so without the high costs associated with the new capacity zone. In fact, Pauline, I think you might be talking about the fact that it could be a benefit as far as energy costs. So what are we doing to mitigate the impacts of this new capacity zone? Well, first, we and the New York Independent System Operator are working with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to potentially phase in the new capacity zone over 3 years. That would give us time to develop some of the transmission solutions and other things that we're trying to do to mitigate this capacity zone. However, just yesterday, FERC denied this phase-in, but we're going to continue to lobby for it. We're going to see if we might be able to work through that. Secondly, a major factor affecting capacity prices is the type of generator used to artificially set the price of the new capacity zone. Central Hudson is working with the New York Independent System Operator to prove that a more efficient, less expensive proxy generator should be used in calculating what the impact of this capacity zone might be. And if approved, which it was, again, just yesterday, it could reduce the impact of the capacity zone by 40 to 50%. So that's very encouraging news.
Could you just restate that last
Sure.
sentences?
Yes. There's something called a demand curve that helps to calculate what the impact of the capacity zone might be on our area. And one of the factors that goes into that calculation is to use a proxy generator, a type of generator that could be built in this area, and that would determine what those costs would be. We were working with the New York Independent System Operator to use a less expensive, more efficient generator as that proxy generator. And that would lower the demand curve, that would lower the impacts by 40 to 50%.
Is this like a real electricity generator that actually makes?
Judith,
Yes.
Judith, we'll have a question.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Right. Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
So that was accepted. That's good news. So that's going to reduce the impact of the capacity zone, but we're still looking at about a $55 million impact to our area, which is still very high. We're continuing to work with the ISO to lower the amount of capacity we must purchase in this area. Again, currently I said it was 88%. If we were able to purchase more capacity from outside the area, that would benefit us as well. That would reduce the prices. We're also working to return capacity to the area by potentially returning maybe a retired generator back online in this area. Also, Central Hudson has small existing generators that we use for peaking purposes. We're seeing if we can bring those into the capacity market. That would have a benefit to this area as well by reducing capacity prices. But most importantly, we are working with other utilities and transmission owners to develop and propose and coordinate new transmission that would relieve these bottlenecks at no cost to our customers. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's open it up for questions. Please, the mic is right there because we do have a roll call. So please come to the mic.
Yeah, my name is David Gross. I'm on the Woodstock Environmental Commission. And I'd like to focus on the demand aspect that you two alluded to. And so I know there are, in addition to just the la-di-da kind of demand reduction, like put in LED light bulbs and get a more efficient refrigerator, it seems to me that the real meat of reducing demand is utilizing capacity at times when there's excess capacity and reducing demand for capacity at times when there's a huge load on it. So for example, shifting manufacturing processes to the nighttime when there's not as much load, and shifting household usage. Your washing machine, your dryer to the nighttime when there's not as much load is a very feasible way of reducing demand. Am I missing something, or is that really a viable way of doing it? And then I have a couple more questions, but I just want you to get, am I basically on the right track?
All right. Actually, that is being done. Right now, there's a demand response program. That is being done, actually. There's what's called a demand response program where the largest users are actually paid to shift their load use or reduce their load use during those peak times when called on by the New York Independent System Operator to do so. As far as the loads for the homes or commercial users, when there are peak demands, the New York Independent System Operator may call for a voluntary reduction on the part of homeowners to reduce demand also, but there's also voltage.
Well, the other thing too that's going on is the PSC is pushing policies that require mandatory hourly pricing to customers of high usage. And that is intended to put price signals to those customers that have highest demand to change their behavior in terms of usage and use energy more efficiently in times of, less peak on the system, so shoulder periods, nighttime hours, and all those policies are being put in place. But the reality is the prices aren't sufficient to change behavior. And I think that's what Tom was alluding to with energy efficiency. Even with all these policies, people are saying, I don't care. I'll pay the extra $2 a month to keep my air conditioner on at night or during the day.
Well, so it sounds like you need a bigger stick. I mean, you're offering a carrot by paying people to go offline, and you're talking about hitting them with a stick to change their behavior, and that there's both a valid place for both the carrot and the stick. But it sounds like to me like what you're saying, Paul, is that you need a bigger stick to motivate people more efficiently, more effectively.
Well, I would say there's a stick aspect of it that Paul addressed, but there's also the, I'll let him do the sticking. There's the visibility to it. Part of being able to do that is you've got to be able to have visibility to what people are using, and then the ability to modify that. And that means smart meters, and that means a lot of things that a lot of residents aren't that excited to have on their house. I mean, in New York, I think it's illegal to require that for a consumer, right? So if we can't, I'm sorry?
You have to have the option out.
You have to have the option up? Okay, so, thank you. So businesses sign up because of the carrot, but to have the stick, you've got to have the ability to measure and have the visibility of who's doing it. And, there's some policy changes that are going to have to occur. In France, they have a large nuclear fleet. I think last time I saw 75% of their power is nuclear, which is very expensive to back down, so their hot water heaters across the country typically only work at night. But they dictated that, and that's their national policy. We need policy changes if that's what we're going to do. If it's all voluntary, then you're going to have some pretty good-sized carrots or some pretty heavy sticks.
And also, one of the things you alluded to just now was a smart meter, and I know that in Woodstock there's been a lot of confusion between a smart meter and a dumb meter that transmits its signal through electromagnetic radiation.
I think we're getting off the subject.
Yeah, that's
on that.
good.
I think we could spend the
Let's
whole
stay
meeting,
focused.
which I hope we do on meters, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am?
Yeah. This is for, excuse me, Tom or John. I know that the New York ISO is energy neutral in that reliability is really important. But we are in the middle of a severe climate crisis, and there are goals in New York that call for a transition to a green energy economy. I honestly not only did not hear anything other than acknowledgement of wind, but in either of your presentations specifically about the new capacity zone that incentivized that transition. And on the other hand, I heard that Danskamer and Astoria might be brought back online. So my question specifically about that is, would they need to do what's called repowering? Would they need to severely or radically upgrade so that they're producing much more efficiently with much less pollution? Danskamer in particular is one of the plants that impacts the Hudson River, so we were really glad to know that it did close, and I'd like to see those sources of power replaced with renewables, but I'd like a comment back on that.
Sure. I would say that, I just put solar on my house, and I will tell you that what I get paid from National Grid on that, this new capacity zone would make that a lot more attractive. The one thing about renewables, and again, we're agnostic, but they're not they can be expensive, and especially in smaller scale, because you don't have the value of scale. When you're putting in half a megawatt or 600, and you measure by the denominator, you have a bigger denominator. But the higher capacity prices make those investments more attractive. And Whether or not that's going to, a large-scale deployment of that, I know if you were to go to NYSERDA, they have these calculators you can use. The higher capacity cost and energy cost, the more attractive the solar and distribution looks. We're agnostic to the megawatt. We just want to make sure that if you need 100 megawatts, there's 100 there. And if there are policy that wants to put a price on carbon, like Reggie or a national carbon policy, we can model that in. If there's a way to bring wind and solar in so that they're not inhibited by a market that was created before they were technologies, we've changed those rules so they can compete. But as far as selecting specific technologies and saying this is going to be the winner moving forward, that's a policy decision. That's not something that we play.
The repowering question in particular.
Yeah, that would be more. I can
So,
I don't want to speak for you, that's all.
So man, I think with regard to a plant like Dan Scammer, and Tom can speak to this, the needs, he said, are on those peak days. So if that plant were to come back, and we're not sure if it will or won't, it's not like this plant would run all the time. It may run 20 hours for the entire year. So again, the capacity needs are limited to a very small period of time. And again, the resource doesn't need to be running for 8760 in order to be effective to mitigate the cost impacts.
But would it be repowered? You understand my use of that word.
Yeah, no, I know. We've seen repowering, like in the western side, there was a Dunkirk, I think it was called. There was a coal, and they moved it to natural gas. They repowered it to a natural gas plant. His point, and I think it's something I probably should have mentioned, the average, the average day usage in New York State is around 20,000 megawatts. The peak demand's around 40. So that means half the generation out there isn't running on any given day. But the 5 days in the summer, it's virtually all running. And so his point where if it does come back or if it is repowered, it's still economically dispatched, which means the most efficient generation continues to be dispatched. The more free flowing the transmission, the broader footprint you have of generation to pick from. Now the repowering aspects, I don't know what that's a commercial arrangement, I don't know.
Okay, we don't own the plants, so we can't make that decision. Yeah, we don't own that plant, so we can't make that decision. It's really going to be up to whoever owns and operates that plant. But renewables are an option too. I mean, if someone were to build a large renewable facility in this area, that could help with the capacity prices as well. It would likely have to be significant, but that's a possibility too.
Yes, sir. Phil Rose from Town of Rochester. I have two quick questions, if I may. The first one is about, I believe the state requires 19% of the energy to be renewables. Is that roughly correct?
There are targets. I don't believe there's any requirements.
Okay.
There are targets.
I thought, well,
Unless I'm misspoken. PSCs are.
No, it's targets.
Yeah, they're targets. There's some states have penalties if you don't reach those, but I believe they're
30%.
so,
It's a target, the goal.
okay, but in order to meet the targets and for people who have, are buying, from other suppliers such as Viridian, for example, if I'm assuming that a lot of that capacity is from outside of the new capacity zone. So I'm wondering how would contracts with companies like that or meeting the targets be affected by the 88% requirement? That was my first question. Probably a Paul question.
So the 88%, which is what John was talking about, is what they call the local capacity requirement. It's a calculation that is derived by, and New York City's had one for a long time, is how much generation do you have to buy within your load zone that you know you can deliver. So if there's a thunderstorm and transmission lines drop, you have enough generation to keep the lights on. It's simply you don't want to over-rely on the transmission lines. That's why they have that locational requirement. There's a risk adder the more you rely on transmission for the reliability aspects. In terms of the statewide renewable target, that you could look at this locational requirements two ways. One is it's going to drive because of the cost is going up, more renewables in that zone because it makes renewables look more attractive. If that happens, then that's a good thing. If it doesn't happen, then it's not going to have any impact at all. But the majority of the renewables that we're seeing in the state today is wind in the north and in the west. And you know, there are times when you can go up on our maps up there where it shows the price, and wholesale cost is a negative number. They bid a negative number because they know, because of the production tax credit they get, the federal one, they make, I'm going to make these numbers up, so don't quote me. Let's say they make $30 from a production tax credit. They can bid a negative 25, in other words, pay for us to take their power and still make money, right? And so that's the value of wind. And so those consumers up there at times have free commodity electricity. They still pay the delivery charges and taxes, but that's unlocking the power of renewables. And that's why when we modify our markets, it's not a small task. California still doesn't do that. Nowhere else in the country does that. Nowhere else in the world does that. But here in New York, we led in allowing renewables to bid in their costs and factor in their production savings that they get from the feds basically. So they can bid in a negative number, and I've taken screenshots because it turns blue, and I'm like, what's that color? I've never seen that one. It's negative 20. I'm like, wow, they're paying to play. And they are, because they can still make money because of the federal tax credit. So a lot of the renewables are in that area. The issue is they're bottled right now because of these constraints. The development of the renewables in New York State are being held back by two things. One is most people up there don't want them on their land. There's been a lot of pushback in the north. And the second is being able to deliver it down into the higher cost load balance. Those two things are holding renewables back, at least in New York and the grand scheme.
So,
No, sir.
yeah, so,
I'm sorry.
yes, thank you. That was my question then, is what's the impact of the new capacity zone then on those specific resources and their being available to us as consumers?
The new capacity won't have any effect on those. I mean, any more than your ability to get, in other words, can these guys do a contract with a wind farm in Watertown? I don't know, I ask you guys. I don't know if you guys can do that or not.
To the point that the capacity resource needs to be in the zone, all the ESCOs in Central Hudson are required to procure that capacity in the zone. From an energy standpoint, they can have contracts for energy outside the zone. So the energy can be from outside the zone, but for capacity, it has to be, 88% has to be within the zone.
Okay. The other thing was just for Tom, you talk about New York ISO being agnostic and using a 10-year forecast as your horizon. And I'm wondering, what's the opportunity cost of doing that if in 10 to 20 years we really need to be switched over to alternative sources, given the production curves, particularly for natural gas, but also given that we probably are on the downward slope for oil. If we're we're encouraging investment in capacity in conventional fuels over this period and taking capital for those, for developing that, what happens 20 years from now?
I don't think that the new capacity zone incents fossil any more than it does anything else. So I think it sends a market signal that says if you can compete and you can build and you can sell and make a profit, come here. It doesn't inhibit solar, it doesn't inhibit wind. It's an open market that says, if I'm a wind developer, here's my federal production tax credit, here's what NYSERDA is going to give me, here's my capacity costs, here's my energy revenues, can I make it go? It doesn't discriminate against them. In fact, I would say we allow them to compete here better than anywhere in the world. I guess I don't think that it's necessarily saying you have to build a new plant, a coal plant. It's whatever is the most efficient. And in New York, that also means it has New York has an incredible environmental premium that I think has, led to one of the reasons why we have such clean air, but they've got to meet those. So is coal being built in this state? No, for a reason. I mean, the market's not bringing those in for a reason because they can't afford to run here. And there's no hidden revenue stream for them to be able to come in. The vast majority of the retirements we've had have been the coal plants. I think there's 3 or 4 left.
Thank you.
Next next up. I ask that you try to make your questions as concise as possible. We've got about 10 minutes before we're going to have to start the next panel. So.
Hi, I'm Andy Weiss-Bartzak from Gardner. Over 5 years ago, somebody lectured at SUNY New Paltz that then, when solar was much more expensive, that New York City would have cheaper peak power if they used solar panels, even just for their peak power generation. This new expanded zone seems yet another chapter in squeeze upstate for the benefit of New York City. We do it, it seems like the last few plants built up here, we're sending all their power downstate, and we got the air pollution, we got the transmission lines problems, we get the problems and the city gets the benefits. So it seems to me that what we should be doing is saying to New York City and Long Island, you have to generate your own power. Figure it out. Lower your demand, up your generation. I'd like to know, in this area north of Westchester, lower upstate, whatever you want to call us, do we have a problem with power? Or is it only getting the power down to the city through us that's the problem?
Okay.
Where's the line?
Fair enough. The fact is there's 3 lines. And there's been 2 lines for at least the last 15 years. One into New York City and then Long Island. They've been their own separate capacity zones since we started the markets because of the constraints getting the power into them. Now, it was probably cheaper to build, the 80% of the generation that I talked about coming in, being in and around the city, my guess, and I'm not a developer, but my guess is the further away you get from the city, the cheaper it is to build. So getting the power into that zone, you probably had some locate here. Again, I'm not an expert there. But they have their own locational requirements. They have, Con Ed has the same, I forget what number it is. I think it's 88 as well, isn't it? 85, something like that? It's in the mid-80s. They too have locational requirement where they have to buy generation from within their zone because of the same transmission limitations. What's the new development is that the lower Hudson Valley has the same constraints that those 2 locations have had for the last 15 years because of the loss of the generation locally. We can't get the power from upstate into you now at a gap of around 1,600 megawatts. So it's because of that gap. So they've been their own zones. They've paid their capacity prices. Today, if you were to look at them, I think are, I would argue around, around $15 compared to where you guys, I forget where you guys are at, around $5. So they've been paying ballpark 3-to-1 capacity prices in the last 15 years in New York City than they have here. What's happening now is we no longer have the ability to meet the demand of this area through the transmission system.
All right, but 12% of their need is a hell of a lot more than 12% of our need. And cheap is, I guess, a definition of money. It's not a definition of air pollution, the ugliness of transmission lines in an area that depends upon tourism and people who live here because they like a more natural environment. So you need to be careful about efficiency and cheapness and things like that. So I say again that Long Island, where I grew up, and New York City need to generate 100% of their own capacity, and how they do it is up to them, whether they want to put solar on every flat roof in the city, and they have a lot more flat roofs than we have, or they want to cut back on demand, or they want to control their population so that they live within their boundaries, because we have to pay the price, and I don't think anybody asked us if we wanted to pay the price for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Jack Arnold. I live in Rochester in Accord. I too grew up on Long Island. And on Long Island, there were 2 places that had municipal power, Freeport and Rockville Center. And the price of electricity was just about 1/2 what it was with Wilco, right? And I just wanted to ask the question of how much consideration has been given to municipal power. The other aesthetic and other issues. I live on Central Hudson's P line, so I'm mad as hell no matter what you suggest. Let me tell you that. I was one of the people who founded the Power Line Coalition back in 1998 or whenever it was, to try to get some kind of reasonable cost for what they did. We never did. Anyway, that's a whole thing. As a retired person, I don't want to have to leave here. I'll probably be able to die out from most of the things that are happening, but maybe not. And it's not good to do them in any event, but I'd like some suggestion of municipal power to be considered by somebody sometime. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I feel like I only have 1 minute. My name is Barbara Rose and I'm from Woodstock, New York. I have 2 questions, and maybe they've been answered and I just didn't get it. Why does Central Hudson put a lid on the amount of Why does Central Hudson put a lid on the amount of energy it will buy from wind and solar power from private homes? There's a 15% lid on it. Why is that? Why is it so limited? We could be...
That's a regulatory cap that's put for all utilities. Currently, Central Hudson's is higher than any other utility in New York. It's been raised several times when that cap has been reached. So my assumption is that if that cap is reached again, there'll be a process to evaluate whether it should go up again. So
We're using natural gas that's been hydrofracted, destroying air and water. We've been using radiation. I mean,
well, there's still plenty
we
of...
have all these elements that could be helping
With
us.
the recent increase, there's still plenty to go. So, and again, if history repeats itself, then when we reach that cap, there'll be another evaluation of where it should go from there. It's really it's a marking point. It's something that is set statewide for all utilities. They all have their...
Just arbitrary, or there's a reason?
Okay.
Okay,
let's-
I have one more question. I have been reading about microgrids. They are setting them up in Connecticut. Donnell Malloy, the governor, is investing in microgrids. Localized sources of electricity, powers coming from locally. It's not dependent on a large power source far away that could be disrupted by a branch falling on a wire. Why are we not moving in that direction?
Actually, I think we are. The New York State Public Service Commission has issued RFPs throughout the state for microgrid projects, throughout in areas where populations were 40,000 or more.
I mean, New York
So,
City, imagine every section
Right.
having its own source of...
Yes, that discussion has begun. And again, the state is looking for proposals by utility companies and other private developers to establish microgrids. I think the PSC may want to speak about that later on.
It's John. Thank you very much. Again, I haven't had a chance yet to introduce myself. I'm Jim Den, Director of Public Affairs for the PSC. But I'd like to reassure the woman who was speaking that indeed the Commission is looking hard, looking very closely at the development of microgrids and distributed generation resources. That's one of the most exciting elements that we have in the years ahead.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Frank Lancelotti from Accord. Can you tell us, will there be an impact to our utility bills if Indian Point closes? Based on, if we're going to have to buy from confined generating area.
And I'll speak a little bit about this in the presentation on the transmission proposals. Obviously, anytime you lose a significant resource, and again, we can argue the merits of nuclear and stuff, but it's 2,000 megawatts in the Hudson Valley that runs pretty much 100% of the time. There are significant reliability issues that happen first, and that's one of the issues that's we'll deal with the transmission projects. But secondarily, yes, then you have to look elsewhere to buy that capacity. And from the standpoint that those units run and are running in the sufficient market, something else will set the price, and ultimately it would be probably a higher cost resource.
Is there an estimate as to what percent?
There have been studies. New York City did a number of studies on that. I don't have the numbers handy, but there are publicly available information to look for and get that information.
Okay, sir.
Peter Lamerson from Marbletown. I have two quick questions. In terms of the blue zone, I noticed that it's next to New York City and includes us, just like New York State Thruway is next to New York City and goes through us. And most of the traffic, in terms of pushing I-87 is New York City, Friday afternoons or whenever people are going out. And I suspect we might have a similar dynamic here. We can't do anything to affect I-87 with what we've got up here. And I just wonder how much we're really affecting the power grid that compared to New York City. So my question is, and it's a follow-up question on the one the lady had earlier about New York City zones. Your geographic zone for them, instead of including us in the blue zone, this is to Tom,
Yeah.
why not include the water around Long Island in their blue zone instead of us? And then they could put up, windmills there. Thank you.
Because the water doesn't have an electrical demand.
I'm sorry, what?
Is this on?
That's an arbitrary answer. You said you were agnostic.
There we go. Okay, so the answer is, and apparently I'm not explaining this well.
No.
New York City's demand does not have an impact or on the need for the new capacity zone. They've already been their own capacity zone for 15 years. What's driving the new capacity zone isn't to put power here to feed to New York City. That capacity zone exists today. So that phenomenon, good or bad, has been going on for 15 years if it's occurring. The reason why we need the new capacity zone for this specific area is because of the load growth experience that we forecast in this area at roughly just under 200 megawatts a year, the loss of 1,700 megawatts in this zone, and the inability of the transmission line to keep up with that disparity. That's the only reason why it's not, Long Island, they have a requirement to build 105% of their requirement on island. So this isn't feeding Long Island. This isn't feeding New York City. This is strictly because of the demand within the lower Hudson and the inability of the transmission line to meet that as the generation in this zone has gone away.
Okay, so you lost some generating capacity.
1,700 megawatts in 3 years in this zone.
Can you replace that with solar, like encouraging people who want to do more than send, like if you have a farm, you can only send, I believe it's 25 kilowatts.
Anything above a megawatt can bid into our market, 2 megawatts can bid into our market. Long Island has a solar farm. I know it is a big gap. But that's the challenge. Because in order for us we dispatch generation to meet demand, which means we have to be able to see it. And so, like my solar system isn't something that the NISO can dispatch. It's not a dispatchable asset. And so you need a certain size to be able to do that. And so could it be solar? If someone put up a solar farm here that was of size, absolutely. There's a biomass project coming in. Those megawatts will count. When I say agnostic, I mean we're not saying it has to be natural gas, coal, nuclear, anything. What we're saying is there is a growing requirement in this area that the current system can't fix. And we need an answer to that before the lights are no longer able to stand.
How did we manage to lose that capacity, if I may ask?
If you believe FERC, it's because the 1,700 megawatts retired in part because they weren't making enough in the capacity market before to justify the upgrades to their systems. They couldn't. I'm telling you the truth. I'm just telling you what they said. So if you're a plant owner, you have to be able to make money enough to run that plant. And with the requirements in New York State, and this is across the state, this isn't just in this area, coal's not been able to survive because of the environmental requirements on it, because of the cost of natural gas as compared to the cost of coal. They just simply can't compete. And so coal has been retiring across the state. And you've had some of that in this area retire.
So you saw that capacity go away, but did you make aggressive plans to replace it with something, or you're relying on the private sector to see it by increasing the price?
The problem with not having this capacity zone is you look at the demand for the entire, what we call the rest of state, not New York City, not Long Island. And so without drawing a snapshot around the transmission limitations, it wouldn't have reflected a gap because you've just got the rest of state mushed in one big pile. And if you do that, there's actually excess power. But if you take into account the inability to move that power, now you've got a gap, which is the whole purpose of the capacity zone, is to reflect that reality.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Last two questions, and let's keep it concise because we're running over.
Okay, I'm Leslie Cooper from High Falls, and I'm one of the people that did not know much of anything about the capacity zone before I came. So my question is based on my understanding of what's been discussed here, and a little bit, I did hear before I got here that Central Hudson-Fortis is opposing this capacity zone, and so my question is directed to them. I'm also getting from this that the capacity zone is a lot about trying to encourage generators to come into the area to be more suppliers. So my question is directed to the gentleman from Central Hudson-Fortis in that my understanding is that now Central Hudson-Fortis is strictly poles and wires. You're just delivery, and I guess that means transmission. So my understanding here in the meeting is that you're saying that you think that the problem should be solved with transmission, and doesn't that mean that you are the ones that are going to profit from that, in that it's going to increase your assets and you're part of the business? So is that really is that the solution that you see to this capacity problem, is increasing transmission solely?
It's really a combination of transmission and generation. Yes, the utilities, the transmission proposals that are currently on the table are being proposed by the group of the New York transmission owners, which include all the utilities in New York State, plus the New York Power Authority. Yes, utilities make a return on their assets, but at the same time, we're looking at the impact that the capacity zone would have on rates in our area, and by addressing the root cause of the formation of the capacity zone, which are the constraints in the transmission system, we can alleviate that condition without the high costs associated with a new capacity zone. It's a benefit to our customers too, and we think that we can avoid this, tens of millions of dollars in increased supply costs that will be imposed on our customers by alleviating the condition that's causing that problem in the first place.
And I just had one very quick question. I read in 2013 in the Kingston Freeman, I read that Central Hudson sold their entire portfolio of renewables in 2010. Is that true?
It's CH Energy Group, our holding company, had a portfolio of some renewable generation outside of New York State. We found that we just didn't have the capital to properly invest in those types of facilities, and they were sold to other companies that did have that type of capital or in that business specifically. So we are primarily a regulated utility company here in New York. We're venturing outside of that regulated market, trying to see if we might be able to find a fit. It didn't work out very well for us.
But essentially, you're just, like I heard the Central Hudson rep today, we're poles and wires. I mean, you just deliver it now,
That's right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just have to say that as a resident and a ratepayer, that I feel that you just still have a monopoly on that. And thank you.
All right, next meeting.
I waited to speak last so that the local citizens could talk because I am from Dutchess County. My name is Sharon Kotler and I'm one of the founders of No Monster Power Lines. Just so you know, John will be up here for the next round of questions as well. But I do have a question for Tom, who's the most agnostic person that would appear at this table. And that would be how the northern boundary of the capacity zone was determined. It looks very gerrymandered, almost like a political, and it is very convenient for John to have these very, very rural towns in the capacity zone, the high capacity zone, to help give him leverage for promoting new delivery systems. I suggest, Tom, when you talk about this capacity zone, you do not lump Woodstock in the same sentence in which you're referring to Yonkers. That Westchester County
is not the same as northern Dutchess County, and that the bottleneck, which occurs to all of us who know in Pleasant Valley, is south of here. And the line should be south of here. So I'd like to understand why we are in this new capacity zone.
I guess I'll try that. Again, I wasn't totally involved with when these new markets were established, but the lines that are defining the new capacity zone primarily are drawn around the service territories of utilities. So from the standpoint that the zone that we are in, which is load zone G, and the NISO's map, includes Central Hudson Service Territory as well as Orange and Rockland, and most of Orange and Rockland. And again, when you look at the constraint that exists is between Albany and Pleasant Valley. That's where the bottleneck exists on the system. And from the standpoint, that is the conduit to get into the Zone G, which is our load zone, which is Ulster County, Dutchess County, portions of Columbia County. That is how the new capacity zone was driven. It is, because ultimately, as Tom alluded to, because of the retirements that occurred in our zone as well, right? We had low generation at Danskammer that was forced out because of the flooding that occurred and is looking to retire. There was damages in Rockland County as a result of a flood that caused generation to have to be forced out. Again, as Tom alluded to, this is now an issue we're facing because it's load in our load zone.
Is Albany included in this new capacity zone?
No, again, because my point was that the interface, again, because the bottleneck exists not at Albany, it's between Albany and Pleasant Valley.
So there is a northern line that you find. I mean, but you must think logically that the capacity, usage of power is higher in Albany than it is in Clavering.
Yes, but the fact of the matter is there's plenty of generation resources in Albany already.
So why do citizens have to pay for this? Why is not the transmission company picking up this bill?
Ultimately, again, as we talked about, there's two pieces to the bill. One is supply and one is delivery. This is affecting the supply side of the bill.
And why are they not picking up the bill? Why are they passing it on to the consumer? If we're not using the capacity, we're the bottleneck, right?
No, you are the user of the capacity. That's the point.
So
Okay.
let me
You
try.
cannot tell me Woodstock is using more power than Albany.
No.
So what am I not understanding here?
Let me try.
Okay, capacity. Let's
There's
talk capacity.
just capacity.
And that's it.
There's
Move on.
there's a lot of transmission capability in the northern part of the state, so that we have a better opportunity to move Niagara Power, Northern Power into Albany.
Cheaper power.
Into Albany. Just south of Albany, you hit a choke point, like my fictitious hourglass. That's where the traffic gets bottled up on the transmission system. That's why the capacity demands for this area, we can roughly move 3,000 megawatts through. We need 1,600 more to be able to meet what's retired and what is growing in terms of capacity for this zone. Albany has enough transmission capability to move power from Buffalo, from Canada, but when it comes down, it tends to flow north, from the north and the west down to the south and the east. And as you flow across the state, there are places where it bottles up. And it bottles up currently just south of Albany. There was, 2 years ago, around Utica, a significant choke point as well. But we've seen 3 new generation stations come online in and around Albany that have alleviated that constraint. So it is truly capacity in this area and the inability to move other resources into the area.
So where is the northern line exactly? What town?
Leeds, New York, roughly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Leeds down to Pleasant Valley.
Let's move on to our discussion on transmission upgrade proposals. Now we'll know how they want to move it down. First up is James Den. He's the Director of Public Affairs for the New York State Public Service Commission. He will provide an overview of the process and how communities and individuals actually can participate in proceedings on transmission upgrades. Jim?
Thank you very much.
Hey, Jim. Jim, real quick, I don't mean to, dine and dash, but I got a 3.5-hour drive to get home tonight. So they have my contact information. I'd be glad to take any questions people might have had afterwards, but it's a long drive. So I appreciate your time and attention, but I do have one.
I'd like to thank Jen and Carl for putting together this great panel. I've done a lot of these meetings with community groups all across the state discussing the transmission projects, and I can assure you, you are the first group that has really heard a factual, great representation about what the issues are. They've laid it on the line. They've taken a lot of the stuff I was going to talk about. We talked about the need. You heard about the congestion issue. The Public Service Commission, as you all know, has commenced a proceeding to find a way to reduce the congestion that exists on the transmission system. This is a critically important issue. Tom Rumsey put up this great slide where he showed these renewable resources in upstate New York that are capable of producing energy, but because of these constraints, we cannot get that renewable energy down to where it's needed, and it's here in the lower Hudson Valley. So one of the ways that the Commission has considered doing this is through a new upgrade of the transmission program. And as a result, we solicited a request for proposal for both the incumbent utilities, represented by, as John said, a number of the local utilities, as well as some new companies, private companies, including Boundless is here, and North America. Again, these projects are on the other side of the river, but what I'd like to do, I want to move this along because I'm here to listen to your concerns and comments, but the Commission has set a date for February 20th where we're going to consider some potential changes to the proceeding. And what we want to make sure is that we're taking into consideration the concerns that we're hearing from the public. And one of the primary concerns is that we try to keep projects within the existing right-of-way. I've heard that loud and clear. I see a lot of the familiar faces here. That's very important. And on top of that, and perhaps more importantly, we want to explore new and innovative technologies. We've heard questions about microgrids. That's on the table. We've heard discussions about distributed generation. That's going to be on the table. These are all very important issues, but as the regulator of utilities in the state of New York, it's very important that we ensure that the lights stay on. This is a reliability issue. Tom talked about on a hot summer day, 40,000 megawatts of electricity is demanded. We would not be doing our job if, because of our failure, there's not enough electricity to meet that demand. So one of the key things that we're looking at is finding ways to reduce that peak. We're going to reduce that peak by energy efficiency, by finding ways to share resources, perhaps local sources of energy. These are all on the table. So on January 17th, the Commission did two things. One, it extended the comment period, because as many of you know who are following this, we are now in the comment phase where we've asked for public comment on the initial plans that have been submitted by the 4 development companies. And it's important to recognize not all 4 companies are going to win. At the end of this process, it's most likely going to be only one project. And that's the project that best meets the needs, the requirements that the Commission has set forth. So we've extended that comment period for an indefinite period of time until the Commission can meet again on February 20 to lay out some new concepts. And these concepts are being developed, but again, it's primarily to take into account some issues in terms of energy efficiency and new technologies, as well as looking at ways to minimize and alleviate potential impact on landowners and the environment. So, without going into further detail, I'm happy to answer any questions. But I'd like to turn it over to John, if you'd like, and so we can move it along and, again, listen to your input. Thank you.
Not sure I'll need this. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'm from Boundless Energy, and I know some of the guys on the east side of the river know me pretty well, but around here I don't think they do, so. Shall I use the mic? Or?
Yeah, thank you. Just hold it like this. Hold it like a burrito. It's already on.
Okay, we're good. We have spoken several times. We've had a pretty warm reception on the East Bank, so I say, on Dutchess and Columbia, and that's because we're not doing anything on the east side of the river. We're over here, and so part of my job will be to explain what we're doing over here. We are the West Bank solution, so to speak. But I don't think you know who I am or who Boundless is, so I'm going to take a minute to do that, explain who we are, and then talk a little bit about the issues we've been discussing here, how Boundless fits into them. And then we have, from the West Coast, our president, who's running a big job out on the West Coast in Vancouver, a large transmission project from Canada and the United States. So I'm going to ask him to come up and actually give us a little rendition of exactly what the project entails. I'll tell you sort of generally. First off, by introduction, John Dobson. I've been here for about 35 years this time. I got here in '64, I guess that was quite a ways back. I attended the military academy and did several tours in Vietnam before I came back and got to graduate school. I'm an engineer, PE, civil guy. I built the road into the Oshawa Valley, and then I went into special ops and I was a helicopter pilot. So I've had kind of couldn't quite figure out what I was going to do when I grew up, sort of a problem. But I really love the Hudson Valley. I'm a rock climber, and I cut my teeth down at New Paltz. If anybody climbs rock, my first climb was the Fancy Idiot. And the second one was the Horseman, which is a great climb, about a 5'4". I am an outdoorsman, and I love the environmental stuff's always been important to me. So when I got into energy, which really occurred about the time I went to grad school, I decided that renewables were very attractive. So I spent the last 10 years actually trying to teach the Army, my old alma mater, how to do renewables on a large scale. So I had renewables, it's music to my ears. We had 2 solar companies, a wind company, geothermal, and a waste energy, actually. We tried to get the military to understand how to do these on military bases. In doing that, I also built my own. I was the first guy in the Hudson Valley to have my own hydroelectric plant under PURPA, and I sailed back into Orange and Rock. 20 years ago I did that, when I was teaching energy policy at West Point. I'm on the planning board for Orange County. I've been on the local planning boards. I was on the originally volunteer on the Heritage Task Force for the Hudson Valley, which was the forerunner of the Greenway. So, and I'm an Eagle Scout. I taught nation. So my credentials are, when I got into transmission about 3 years ago, after the Army finally formed a group to do what we were doing, and my students who are now major generals out there had all gotten to the point where they could take care of themselves. John Tompkins, who is kind of our resident genius, and one of the best guys in North America in transmission, asked me, he had been helping me get my renewable power off of military bases, and now he said, I'm going to do some more work in New York. Well, what's more work? Well, he did the project that goes from Sayreville, New Jersey, out to Long Island. This is the Neptune RTS. Probably the most successful merchant transmission project in North America in the last 10 years. Most successful technically and most successful financially. As you know, Shore, when it closed, Long Island had a big problem. Load growth out there, a lot of people, not enough power. You can't build anything out there, you can't get environmental approvals for it, very difficult, very expensive. Lilco at that time was in trouble. So they put out an RFP. John responded to the RFP, and I met him just about that time. That was the year 2000. He came in my living room down, I live right on the river. I had my own waterfall there, Buttermilk Falls, the biggest waterfall in the river. When Henry Hudson came up the river, he called it Buttermilk Falls, 1609. And I built a little micro hydro there, and it provides about 70, 80 kW, and it runs the house and goes back into the grid. So John was in my living room, and he said, I'm going to build this underwater line out to Long Island. And I thought, boy, this is pretty wild. This guy's a really bright engineer. He's double E and he's a nuke guy. But he's not real big nuke fan, which was sort of interesting because I live 10 miles from Indian Point. And I prefer renewables, but John was successful over 7 different proposals, and they had a single environmental intervener, not a single one. In fact, they were in his favor. So he built this line from Sayreville, New Jersey, 67 miles. The Wall Street Journal said, this guy's crazy. He thinks he's Captain Nemo. You know, he's going to go underwater 67 miles. But he did. He came under Jones's Beach. He tied it into the middle. He's carrying 20% of all the power in Long Island today. There's a business manager that sort of runs the project, but it was John's idea. It was engineering, and he owns a big chunk of it. So when John told me he wanted to do more work in New York, and he wanted me to help him and be a principal in the firm, I said, you know, I'll leave renewables for a while. The truth is, we need transmission to make renewables work. We need 2 things to make renewables work. One is to be able to move it from where it is, because to make renewables competitive, you've got to do it large scale. You've heard these guys refer to that. If you do it small, it's hard to make it compete with the fossil fuels. So you've got to do it large, but that means you can't do it close to where people are, so you've got to move it. So you need transmission, which is why FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which NISO is tied into, said, in addition to reliability, keep the lights on, in addition to the economics, and make it cheap, we want you to do policy, which is, utilities didn't want to do renewables. Renewables are messy. You've got to do a lot more managing. It's tough to the system because it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. So they resisted it. And utilities, as you know, are status quo creatures. They don't particularly like change. They are, all with all due consideration, I mean, they've got their service territories, they're monopolies. Thomas Edison was an American. Every little town got their own monopoly. We got 550 of them. They got their own service territories. Do a great job of distribution. Times are changing. They're going to have to get with the program, and they will. It's much easier, though, for a bunch of bright engineers to get cutting-edge technology and find solutions, especially with a guy like John Tompkins, who's our resident genius. So when we were asked to do power, actually, we started with LIPA, and they ran an RFP, which didn't turn out. And then the plant up in Empire said, we want to move our power down to the city. So they asked us to help. John came to me and said, will you join me on this? About that time, the Energy Highway came out. So we had a problem. Our ideas are good enough, they can be stolen. It's hard to copyright them. You can't really patent. So for a small group without a big law firm to back us up, we've got the right technology. We get big firms. We have Siemens, we have ABB. We have guys with turnkey guarantees. So we can't afford to mess around like the utilities can. If they go over, they've got a rate base, they can handle it. They got a large organization. We have to be correct. We got to be right. So we get it right up front. We spend a lot of time, a lot of effort on the engineering and the route and where we connect. That's really the key, because you don't have to go high diddle diddle right down the middle the way everybody tells you to go. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's, the truth is there are better ways of doing this. When this system happened, it was never planned. Because we had these individual utilities, it grew. John likes to say, when you look at the system, the national grid, we have the worst national grid of any developed country, by the way. I taught energy policy, and I worked with DOE when it was first formed. I loaned myself out when I was a professor. We have the worst. Why? Because we invented electricity. So each little place got their own electricity. When we hooked them together, finally, John said it's like a spider on LSD. Yes. Okay. So what we ended up with was a system that needs to be connected a lot better, and that's what we tried to do. So we found a way of doing this in a much shorter, more elegant system that doesn't go down the middle on the East Pike. We started at Leeds, and we still moved 1,300 megawatts. We were reviewed a year ago by the folks at the New York ISO under the RNA, their Reliability Needs Assessment, which they do every 2 years. They liked our project, they put it on their list, but a merchant project came along down in Queens and they would do that first, so we didn't get a chance to build it yet. But they've already looked at it. So now we cut it down to just the very minimum when the judge said he wanted to go easy on the ratepayers. So we've got the cheapest, most minimalist with the highest technology of anybody. We go underground and we stay in the right of way. That's always been our mantra because it's really the cheapest way to do it if you know how to do it. And so it was our rhetoric that the governor put into his State of the State speech. And we were really happy to hear that, but he hasn't spoken to us yet, so we don't know what he wants to do, actually. But we do know we are in the right of way the whole way. And only we go underground when we have to, which is to go into the Hudson River. We horizontally drill. We go actually below PCBs and all this stuff on the bottom. NIPA's already going across there from Roseton to Fishkill. We do it in their right of way, but we do it underground. And then we change some wires out coming down from Leeds, which is where the problem really starts. Leeds to Pleasant Valley is where the problem is. We go around it rather than going through it. That's how we solve this problem. So we come on your side of the river. Makes your system stronger. It won't break down. There are 4 ways to get north-south. 2 of them are over there going through Leeds and Pleasant Valley. One of them's out west, where NIPA built the line from Varsity South, from Utica down to Newbury. The 4th one is right here, and it's weak. It's only 1/345. We're going to make it 2. We're going to take some wires off and put some high-tech wires that carry twice as much power. Same, you won't even be able to tell the difference. We change 2 wires, we bore 2 holes, and we connect across at the bottom from Roseton to Fishkill. That's all I got to do. That's why it's only $270 million, which is about 1/3 the cost of anybody else. They got to go 100 miles. They got towers, they got wires, they got all the stuff they got to do. They may be able to stay in it right away. They're going to try, but it's going to be tough. There's a couple of ways of doing it, but it ain't pretty. We think we've got a much easier solution. Again, we've got the financial capability, we've got people standing by if we were chosen to do this. But there's a traditional way and there are better ways. So with better wires and with better technology, you can do a little better job. It's easier for us to do those things. Utilities are going to try to do what they know how to do first, and then they will do what they have to do. Microgrids and renewable energy is what we did for the military. We really love that stuff, so be happy to talk about that, but right now this is transmission, and we've got a problem, and we can fix it. And we need your help, and we'll help you. We'll also help, we can solve that $370 million problem. Our whole project is less than 1 year, that additional levy they're going to put on to make sure something gets done. But our project can happen very fast because there's no interveners. There's nobody against it. Why is nobody against it? Because there's nothing, yeah, I'm sorry. We're not hurting anything. We're changing 2 wires and boring 2 holes. So, yeah, to show you exactly what we're doing, if you want, Rob, you please stand up and say hello. Hello, everyone. This gentleman is also an engineer, an MBA, he's our president. He's not here very often, so I wanted to see how things are going. And if you'd like, we've got a PowerPoint presentation that can show you exactly what we're actually doing and the technology and everything. So if you want, we'll do that later. Thank you.
What's the name of your company?
Boundless Energy.
Boundless Energy.
We don't use boundaries. We've got to think outside the box.
Boundless.
Boundless, yeah. Boundless Energy Northeast. If we listen to the whole thing, everybody else.
Okay, good evening. John's going to just pull up a quick PowerPoint presentation. I'm Paul Haering. I work at Central Hudson, and I'm going to provide you a little bit of context on a different proposal, one that Jim talked about in this competitive process that we'll be working with the PSC. And it's for what's called the New York transfer. So, John. So again, there's a number of issues that are facing us with regard to energy infrastructure. A lot of these things have been already addressed. I don't want to go back over these, but again, aging infrastructure, both on transmission and generation. We have this persistent congestion that exists, and the PSC came out in their order on the AC transmission, really addressing 2 bottlenecks that we've talked about. One that exists between Albany and the Hudson Valley, and the second that exists from the western part of the state to Albany. So really, there's been a lot of work that's been done here. So this is not a proposal that comes out of nowhere. The utilities have worked together collaboratively over a period of about 4 years studying the transmission system and trying to identify what is the most efficient way, the least impactful way to reinforce the system, assessing aging infrastructure at the same time. Because we don't want to be in a position where we go and replace a line because it's at the end of its useful life, and not look at what the opportunity would be to make improvements to the grid that would provide tangible benefits. So when you look at the grid, almost 12,000 miles of transmission across the state, no major transmission built since 1980s. And 40% of the system is going to need to be replaced in the next 30 years. So again, it's a major issue. You all hear about aging infrastructure. It's something that we want to be in front of. We understand that there are new technologies and things that will address and change demand behavior in the future. But ultimately, as Jim said, we have an obligation to provide and ensure reliability. And the aging infrastructure is something that needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed prudently. So who is this group? The group, the New York Transco, is really all the utilities that currently serve New York ratepayers. It's all the investor-owned utilities, as well as two public authorities. And New York has two public authorities, one in New York Power Authority, and the other one is the Long Island Power Authority. And again, we've been collaborating for the last roughly 4 years, looking at a time horizon of 20 years, and assessing what should be done. And we've run multiple scenarios in terms of identifying the overlap of the aging infrastructure and projects that would best provide tangible benefits to ratepayers. And again, the goal of this group is to collaboratively work together to identify and develop those transmission needs that would assess and address public policy. And as Jim alluded to, this PSC proceeding is really addressing the public policy of this persistent congestion. So there's a number of components in the proposal, and really there were two proceedings that the PSC had undertaken. One dealt with the potential retirement of Indian Point, and the governor has announced that he has an interest in potentially retiring Indian Point. And again, as I spoke about that previously, that can't just be done without reliability impacts. So the PSC, in order to prepare for that, established a proceeding to identify solutions. There are 3 projects that have been basically approved by the PSC that will be constructed by the group of utilities that is forming the Transco. One is a substation upgrade in the Staten Island project in Con Ed service territory, and the other 2 projects are the one in Orange. There's a project that goes between a Rock Tavern station in Orange County and Ramapo in Rockland County. It's on existing towers. There's no new towers that need to be installed. It's just putting conductors on an existing tower. And then there's a project called Marcy South Series Compensation. Again, it's some projects that improve the efficiency of power transfer on the grid through basically installations at substations. They're what are called series compensation units. And there's also a portion of reconductoring of an existing line that will be done on a section of a New York State electric and gas line that's out in the western part of the state. And then there's 2 other projects that are part of this AC proceeding to address the bottlenecks that exist, again, from western part of the state to the Hudson Valley. The Edict to Pleasant Valley is really the project I really want to kind of touch on tonight. This is a project that will, and I'm not sure if this is has been announced or not, but will be entirely within existing rights of way. There is no need for new right of way for this project. It will, in some cases, parallel existing lines. In other cases, will replace existing lines on the rights of way. But again, there is no requirement for new property. No property rights will be needed for the construction of this line. So what are the benefits? So the benefits are, again, addressing this persistent congestion. And what does that mean? It means that cheaper power upstate flows to the Hudson Valley. And what is the tangible benefits? We've identified over $176 million of annual savings for consumers in the region, in this region as well as to the south of us. Also, because we have a more reliable system, there's less generation that needs to be built. That's an annual savings of anywhere from $50 to $200 million, depending on how the calculation is done. It also addresses the issues facing us with the reliability impacts of Indian Point. So we don't have to worry about if Indian Point retires. It addresses the new capacity zone. With this new transmission, we wouldn't be hearing about this with FERC and the need to raise prices to incentivize generation in the Hudson Valley. It also creates tax revenue. The utilities pay a significant amount of taxes on their assets. And those tax revenues flow to the areas where the projects are built. Anywhere from $20 to $40 million of annual tax revenue. There's also, again, the minimization of the use of right-of-way because we are not going to require the need any new right-of-way for these projects. There's also reduced emissions. By more efficient generation that's available upstate being able to operate, we can reduce the amount of generation that's less efficient in the Hudson Valley region from having to operate. That means less carbon and less NOx emissions. And again, the other piece is that it allows us to better integrate renewable resources. So again, when you look at the total package, there is, honestly, when you look at the cost and the benefits, there's ultimately net benefits to Hudson Valley consumers. Again, so as Jim indicated, the PSC proceeding is underway. I think we see this as a good opportunity. It's an open process. It allows for a lot of stakeholder input. It's a competitive process with non-incumbent generators that are allowed to come and participate. That's a good thing to see other proposals. And again, it's an opportunity for stakeholder input, and I think that's of value. The other thing that will occur through this process is the New York ISO will be evaluating these proposals independently to determine what projects make the most sense. And that, again, will help in us to identify what projects are the best to be selected in this process.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Dan, last but not least, Dan Duthie, Esquire. Dan's an attorney who specializes in energy, utility, regulatory, and zoning law. And he represents, also representing the town of Milan in the Public Service Commission proceedings on the transmission upgrade. So thank you for coming, Dan.
Thank you, Carl. I'm also representing in the AC competitive case the farmers and families for Livingston. So we have two groups, and I want to start out first by observing that the very interesting presentations that have been made tonight all talked about building stuff, building transmission lines, building generators. And I'm here to suggest that there's a third alternative. Maybe the demand can be satisfied by building nothing. Maybe the solution is to have, as has already been observed, to have the downstate people, take care of their own needs. And I think that there are ways of doing it. But I'm not going to get into that right now. What I want to do is just give you a little bit of flavor for the legal proceeding, if you will, that's before the Public Service Commission. It's under Article 7 of the Public Service Law, and it's been bifurcated into Part A, which is going to be a screening process, one screen of which is to produce 1,000 megawatts of transfer capacity on the Central East constraint. The other part of the case, if you pass Part A, you go into Part B, and then you have to go through the full-blown Article 7 proceeding, which can take anywhere from 12 months to 2 years in the typical case. This is not a typical case, and we still are awaiting guidance. There was a deadline that was set for scoping comments, fancy name for the parties in the case to tell the project applicants what information is needed to make a complete record so we understand all the impacts. That has been delayed, and I guess, Jim, you're saying that that's going to be addressed at the Commission's February session.
That issue will be raised at February 20 session, yes.
Okay, so once the scoping documents are submitted, then the administrative law judges will issue a ruling telling the various applicants what they need to do in terms of additional studies, whether it's impacts on, the natural environment, whether it's impacts on right-of-ways, and to look at the alternatives. And one of the alternatives has to be determined, is there a need? Now, I'm trying to figure out where the 1,000 megawatts came from, and I'm still not getting a good answer. And we're going to really bury ourselves deep into the issue of need in connection with this proceeding. Because if there is no need, there is no reason to build additional transmission lines. And it's good to hear that in some cases, Transco is going to be building transmission that's not going to be affecting or taking any additional land. I didn't hear them say that they weren't putting up new towers in addition to that. I also didn't catch the cost that was put out by the Transco proposal. Boundless proposal does have a cost associated with it. And so to the extent it's common sense that a project developer that's only restringing new wire on existing towers is obviously less intrusive. And we also like Boundless on the other side of the river, because we are on the other side of the river. So I'll leave, if anybody has any questions in terms of the process, and we want to be real quick to get you all out of here, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Okay. Hit the question line. I'm going to ask that you be a little more concise with your questions. But please remember, this is not a dialogue. You're asking a question, you get an answer. Okay? No debating. Manager?
Yeah, my question is, it's sort of going back to the earlier portion, but Cricket Valley, has that been factored into capacity because it is in the capacity zone?
Who would like to?
I believe, Manna, that Cricket Valley plant has a minimal benefit to the capacity zone.
1,000 megawatts is minimal?
It's because of its location. I might need some help in answering that question from one of my colleagues here.
Yeah. Well, the issue is, in order for it to be included in the capacity zone calculations, that it has to meet certain requirements in terms of the resource being here. And at this point, it hasn't met the milestones. Again, because there is no tangible proof that the plant will be built.
But is there also an issue with its location as well?
Well, the plant itself has other problems with, in order it to participate in the capacity market, it will require new transmission to be built. And there's an Article 7 proceeding that was announced, and they're seeking waivers to build a new line from where the generator is located in Dover back to Pleasant Valley in order for it to actually be able to work. Again, these issues about location are critical in terms of locating resources.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
So my question is that this whole conversation that I'm sitting here listening to has to do with how we're using more air conditioning and we're using more heat. The reality is that it's global warming, and it's too hot and it's too cold, and that's why we're using more things. And it's not Central Hudson, it's Fortis. And if you support hydrofracking, which causes global warming, and you sell your renewables, then what are you talking to me about we need to get more transmission lines and it's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. The fact of the matter is that if you really care, then what you should do is you should support renewables. Otherwise, in 5 years, you'll be back here with the same argument over and over again. So tell me why your company supports hydrofracking. That's my question.
I don't believe that.
That's
part of the transmission discussion.
No.
Good question, but not part of the transmission discussion.
Okay, so I heard the person from PSC say that we have an extended comment period. The last time we had a comment period with PSC was whether Fortis was going to take over Central Hudson. And when we were there, hundreds and hundreds of people said, we don't want this. But the PSC said, well, we're going with the shareholders. So now, my question is, we're going to have an extended comment period, and is this going to be about the people, or is it going to be about the shareholders?
I can assure you that we are watching very closely and listening very closely to the comments that we receive. You know, we're spending numerous hours meeting with people, meeting with members of the public. So this is very, very important for us. So thank you for your comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Someone suggested that the transmission upgrade would promote renewables, but I wonder if it won't promote shale gas-fired generation. So where is this energy generated?